Der letzte Vortrag heute
And the last presentation before the lunch break is going to start in a few seconds.
Ich werde den Vortrag auf
I am going to give this presentation in German, and the slides are in English. So I would like to ask my colleagues to put on their headphones again.
Der Vortrag
And this presentation has the title of CMDBs and CheckMK. The topic itself is automation of CheckMK, automation of monitoring configuration, and automation in the sense that nobody needs to click on their browser around and it's just all happen automatically. Who am I? My name is Robert Sandner. I've been working for Linux for the past 20 years, and for the past 3.5 years I've been working for Heinlein, and I've been working with CheckMK for 3 years already. We are CheckMK partners, and we also offer classes at our academy in collaboration with Matthias Kettner. And this is enough advertisement for now, I think. And I also do consulting projects for CheckMK and also other things. And the company Heinlein is maybe a company that's well known to others in the area of emails. We have a small project that started 1.5 years, mailbox.org, and that is bringing back privacy in the area of emails, and that's also available in the business edition. So if you have a company and you would like to host mail, you can have a look at that as well. So what can I do with the CheckMK configuration in terms of automation? Why do I want to automate it? Those are the questions that arise at first. And automation makes life a lot easier. That's a very simple statement. And I think everybody that's working with configuration management systems is probably going to agree that configuration is being reproduced and you can really trace and track. And I also would like to really monitor the things that I'm interested in and not have to really manually include hosts in my monitoring system afterwards. So what I do is reality and I don't forget anything. And with the help of a CMDB, I have a central instance here. A central repository is what it's called for configuration. And that makes documentation easier. And it's not as many manual steps, and therefore we have to be honest here, also there are not as many errors here. So each manual step can be forgotten, obviously, but there can always be errors. If you, for example, if you have a host in Vato and you forget a tag or something like that. The sources of my information for automation are classical databanks. Inventory databanks is what they're called in German, and that's really the place where you get information on the systems and where you can group them, for example, and also where you can be in the CMDB with different attributes here. And these systems can be managed there, and most of the time that is already included in the purchasing process, so the systems are really there early on in the process. And of course it is very secured by reviews and so on, that these sources are always very current. And the next thing, the more modern or maybe the recent version is the deployment tool or configuration management tools like SaltStick, Puppet, Chef, Ansible, and so on. And of course also some others, where you have the host configuration, and it's happening dynamically. And as soon as you have this system and you have hosts here in the cloud, for example, then of course it would be nice if this new host then automatically was included in the monitoring. So especially in a cloud environment, you have a lot of things that disappear very quickly again, but very dynamic processes in place that hosts produce and also get rid of. And those instances are usually not only appearing in the configuration database, there's no purchasing process for it and so on. And that's why they are just there and also shut off there if you need it. But then you also want to monitor them because you want to know, are the instances running the way they're supposed to? Is the application running correctly in this instance? And if that happens on an automated basis, then of course this is a lot easier because this cloud infrastructure is also automated then, and that makes it a lot easier. It's not somebody sitting that's clicking there on the next instance and so on because they know that the load of the website is too high. It's all happening automatically. So what can be automated in this context of CheckMK? Really, it's all host properties. So the host name, also the location in the folder tree, the tags of a host, the IP address. And something I would also like to mention, the web AP that I'm going to show you later. You can also automate the service discovery, so that's the and also the activation of the configuration if you have the hosts in your monitoring. So what can happen this way and what can you not automate here? Those are things like rules and tag groups. So those are things that you configure for your monitoring system, and they have to be there before you actually have the host through this automated process. So, of course, one might say that with CheckMK, everything's there in text. So you can theoretically really use that completely with the help of a tool. And then you have things like host tags and rules, and you can automate those. But the mechanisms I'm showing you today, they really don't do that. So they assume that these things are already there through the WATO and that they are not automized. Okay, so I cannot do that. So how do I automate CheckMK configuration? There are several different possibilities to do that. There are several different solutions for that, and you have to think about which one you should be using. The first method I would like to show you is imports, WATO import. That's a little script that you receive. Who used that before? So less than 10%. And that imports a comma-separate list here, and the folder name is the host name, host alias, and IP address, no more and no less. And then in this folder, that is then in the first column here, there is a new host.mk. And then that's new, that's being produced. If there's already one, then it's going to be overwritten. And there are no host tags. And you cannot delete or modify hosts. And that really means you use that tool when you have a new site and you then just want to import a range of hosts. And you then maybe can really have that structure of that folder, and then you can put the host tags right there. that are then being inherited. You can find that on every installation in this folder, in the folder Treasures. And it's a very simple tool that makes it where these host MK folder is being created, and then in Wato later on you can then do all the settings. And then you can also have the hosts, you can move them to different folders so that they are then safe with this tool, for example. If you, for example, have an import folder, if you want to define it that way. The second method is also working on a file system, but it is a little more defined. I can have the host MK, I can write it myself, and I can also have the .wato folder. And what do I have to do with the host MK? Well, I have to have the list all hosts. I have to extend that with my host name and also the tags. And then I also have to have the IP address in some cases, if it's not DNS. And I also can have an alias for extra host confs here. And then I can also have other attributes for hosts for Wato, so Wato knows what kind of attributes are there. And then I should also have a .wato file. I can create that with the attributes and then also the number of hosts in this folder. Numhost is important in order for you to have the whole range, because that's being added up. And if you don't have that, then you don't see how many hosts you have in that folder. So that's really the same as a way to import, but it's very interesting because with this method, you then have a folder and hosts, and the hosts in this folder, you can change them in terms of changing them. And those would be changes that you can do in another way. So you can have the _lock, and then somebody that is using the Wato interface, they cannot change those hosts. They can't delete any hosts, they can't add any hosts, and they really can't change the tags either, and they can't move them. I can do the same thing in a .wato for the folder. So what I do in this case is I can't change the file and also not the settings, for example, that are then being inherited to the hosts. So I can do that in different combinations, and if the hosts are locked, then there is not the button save and go to services is not there anymore, but the service discovery is something you can still do via the clipboard. Or did that change? It used to be a pin, now it's a clipboard. Okay. So the numhost is also something I mentioned. If the folder is locked, then Wato can also not update the number of hosts that are in that folder. And that's why this variable has then be inserted manually. So with that, I can write a system that is from CMDB data and then is directly into the configuration data of CheckMK, and is then being protected of changes that are made in CheckMK, and therefore you always have the most current version in your monitoring. If I then automate service discovery and activation, then I have to do it this way. I think everybody knows that. Then the third method that is available is the Wato Web API. If I remember correctly, that's what we discussed last time. I think it was actually introduced last time. Who's using this already? Okay, some of you are already using that. So that's a method that is not accessing the file system in order to change the configuration. It has the HTTP monitoring instance and is accessing it that way, and then has an appliance as well, an appliance function. So the web API talks JSON, and of course I also have to sign up, and that only happens as an automation user. If you are a user, then there's the normal user with a password to log in, and then there's also a second option, and the second option is the automation user, and that is exactly what you need in this case. So what kind of methods do I have for that? I can add single hosts, I can edit single hosts, I can delete single hosts, I can get single hosts, I can get all hosts that are available in or that are configured in the monitoring system. And that is something that I was actually thinking of, if I might say so. And I can also discover services for one host, and I can also activate the changes. So what does that look like? A request like that has some requirements here. I have an endpoint, a URL. That's my monitoring site slash checkmk slash web API. And I have some URL parameters, the username, secret, which is the password for the automation user. I need action and possibly also a mode. And for some actions, I also need a payload data. So different values that I'm giving out, that is the request variable there. That has to be JSON formatted, and it says, for example, host name. So if I have to get rid of a host, if I have to delete a host, then I have to give the API host name. I am going to introduce all the individual requests really quick. I'm going to start with add host. So in this case, the action is add host, and the request looks as follows. You have an array that is called attributes, and you have the IP address, for example, the alias, and certain tags. And then outside of this attributes, you also have the folder and the host name. And what we see here is that you are then not given out the tags as tag string, but together with the tag group in which the tag is defined. So that is very important in this case, because this way the Way2Web AP can check very quickly whether it's valid or not. So there is a validation process taking place, and therefore it's not possible to set unknown tags. So all tags that I want to use have to be defined beforehand in tag groups. So that also means that I also don't have any auxiliary tags right here, but they are then being set by Way2 later on because they are in the tag group and have been configured there. So if I add a host like that, then it says here, for example, in the variable folder, os/Linux, Way2Web API will then create that folder if it doesn't exist yet, and the slash here is what separates the levels here, which you know already. And when in doubt, there are being two folders created. That's different than in Kadir. The other folders are being created as well. Okay, the edit host has then request data, and what they have is the attributes that I want to change. And I can also then give them a list of certain attributes that I want to delete. So that is very similar in the Way2Web AP. If I, for example, get rid of the check, then of course the value is being used that was inherited from the folder, and that's the same effect that I can achieve here in the way that I use this group, and then I unset it and declare it that way in the request section, and then the other values being used. So the host name in this case is always very unique. So in a monitoring system, even if I used a different type of monitoring, then I cannot use host names that can be used several times. They have to be unique. And if I then have attributes and I want to delete them, then if necessary, the values of the folder are being inherited. Then we have three operations: get, discover, and delete. Delete host means that you only have to inherit the host name. Same goes for get host. With get host, you also have the possibility to say, I want the effective, so really the valuable attributes here, I want them as well. So then I don't only get the ones that are tags with the host, but also the tags that were inherited from the folder. They're all in one list. And discover services for a host. In this case, I can say what mode it's supposed to take place. Is it a new mode, new services? I want to remove certain things, and I want to refresh, for example. It's very similar as it is the case with the way-to-web API. If I do discovery, for example, in that case. Get all hosts activates, works very similar. That works the same way with all hosts, so you don't have to have request data here, and you can also have effective attributes on one, and then you inherit all attributes. And that's not only the tags, but also the SNMP community, if it's in that folder, for example, or also something like parents that are usually also right there if they're being used. And then the last point is action activate changes. And with that, we can activate changes here that were done earlier. And I can also say that I want all changes here. And usually you only use the changes from API, those are the only ones that are active. But then if way-to-web users change something, then this request is going to give me an error message, because they're going to say, well, somebody else was doing some changes in between. We know that from the normal usage of way-to as well. And if I then have monitoring here, then the activation of the individual sites is going to happen one after the other. So it is possible that there are timeouts then, depending on how long the communication with the individual sites takes. And in that case, we have the possibility that we can say, I would only like to activate the sites that really had changes or that changed. That's what way2 already knows. Or I just want specific sites to be active. And then I can have that request, and then I can just put the site names on there. Okay, so that were all the methods in order to change the configuration here. I can do something like the current state and commands. I can automate that as well. That's not the way-to-web API, but the multi-site web API. Because multi-site is giving me the monitoring view, while I get the configuration view in the other one. So in order to automate that, I can do something very easy. You can use views in multi-sites, and they don't only have HTML, but also JSON and Python. I'm not sure if somebody has already realized that. But then you get commands that are being executed where you have browser requests emulated by having these URLs that the browser is actually opening. And then if you have a downtime, for example, and you can see here that view PY with a service, the host localhost, and service dummy. And again, then we have a downtime of 2 hours that is being set with the commentary test. And this whole is then an automation user with the HTTP request that I have to send, of course. And that way, I am able to automate and get automatically information that I can put in my system and then also execute commands from there without actually using the live status AV. Because live status, you can do that through TCP. I do that for monitoring as well, but in that case, I don't have any user identification and things like that. And maybe I do want that if I'm getting something from a very different system, for example. And in that case, I have the option of using multi-site, not only getting to look at the sites in a browser, but also having that process as an automated process. So automation is really something that doesn't require a user in front of the computer. So those are the methods that are available in terms of automation. And now I am going to show you 2 different tools that I would like to introduce to you. One is one for client.
And for the multi-site, I would have to add here, and this client was presented a few weeks ago over the mailing list. I looked at it recently for a short time. I have command line tools to start a host, to read out information, to activate changes. There is a connection to Puppet, internal node classifier, to automatically create hosts. And I can execute commands like naglos, acknowledgement, or naglos downtime. And the entire project is still in an early stage of development. It's on ClickUp, but I noticed that it's been programmed to a very special environment because certain tech groups are being as a prerequisite, they're set as a prerequisite like role and another one. So somebody wrote this tool for himself, but it's a good starting point to write something from it and to use it. There is a ready-made product for this, the I Do It. We presented this last year on the conference. I Do It is, well, a classic CMDB. And last year, a module was being presented for an integration with CheckMK, where the information that is in a CMDB as a configuration can be or did go into the monitoring as well. And the check results were then visible in the CMDB. And I Do It, from its construction, it is like tree-based, a tree structure. And so if something changed in the lower part of the tree, how did it affect the upper part? It's a bit like the business intelligence with CheckMK. And you could see what happened if, for example, a component fails in the lower part of the tree. I won't go into details here right now because we presented it last year at the conference. The slides, there weren't that many slides because it was more or less a live demo, but the video is available online. And there's also a link to it in my presentation here today. So the conclusions from this is, well, the ones I drew from it. I have 2 approaches I can choose from to automate configuration changes, like a file-based method directly in etc CheckMK. So I change the files. Of course, this is a quick way to do it, but I have to know what I'm entering. So I need to know how these files are structured, and I need channel access to my monitoring site. So from the outside, like if I want to just send files in from the outside, at least I need an SSH access to the user that the site is working with. The web API may be slow. I didn't really do any performance testing, I must admit. With 200 or 300 hosts, I mean, this is still feasible. It basically talks JSON, so you need a JSON client, or an HTTP client, which is JSON compatible. And for the web API, I just need HTTPS access to the monitoring site. So this web API can be reached through various outlets. So what I want to present now in the next part is based on a customer's project that I started half a year ago. It's a small sync tool that is able to, that gets data from a CMDB, and then with the configured host, it is comparing this data to CheckMK. And if we have time later, I want to demonstrate this as well. The database we used was Landsweeper. Does anybody know this? One or two? Okay. I didn't know it actually in detail. But then it didn't really affect me much because this CMDB does give me an XML export. How this happens, well, is again not much of my business. The customer just gave me this XML file and I took the tool and had the data there, and the customer gave me the features he wanted and I programmed it accordingly. So how are XML, or how is XML data built up? Normally, like I have the document element and then I have the server elements in there, and in those server elements I have attributes. You can see it quite clearly here. I think hopefully in the back you can also see it, like the host name, which is here called asset name, the IP address, and different things, elements. And in the end, this is special. There are 3 tags that are called relation type and relation comment and name. In this case, this is the primary support contact for this host. And the special case here was that in the database there was a relation in the database to this. The XML export then had several server objects in it in the end, and they had to be imported separately and then unified again. So you would expect that this can also go easier, really. The first thing I did was a mapping, looking at the XML elements and making sure they match the CMK attributes. For example, asset type name would be a folder in the end. Then there was the asset name, which then we call host name. The description is the alias. An IP address is IP address as well, but should also be describing which monitoring site it is on and which location that is at. So the customer gives me a list of IP networks and locations, like geographical locations and also monitoring sites, and they all had relations to each other, and then using the IP address I could find out which subnet it was and then assign the site, and this can also be set automatically. Even the monitoring site where the host is then monitored, that can be set via the web API. Then there's the landscape, which is then tagged to criticality. And in the lower end here we have the relation. So to that person who is actually responsible for the system, there are 3 tag groups for this. I mean, this customer required this because they had a stakeholder or an owner. So primary, secondary support contact as well. I mean, in this case, this was based on single people, like individual people, and I didn't question their concept. But maybe it would be an idea to insert contact groups here because, well, I mean, usually this is a team-based approach. I did this with Python. For once, because CheckMK is written in Python, also because I personally have been working and writing in Python for 15 years, and after 3 weeks you can still read it, so that's also a factor. In Python there is a nice module which is called request. It has the subtitle HTTP for humans, which makes the working with the web API much easier. In combination with the JSON module, there is not that much you really have to program or write yourself. So this is the core function here, which is the whole script is based on, which is the AP request, where the parameters are in there, sometimes request data, and possibly an adapted error message. So if you have request data available, then you need to send a post request. Otherwise, you can set a GET request. The data is coded in JSON out of the Python data structure. So they're being converted to JSON, and then in this request variable, they're being transmitted. And in the end, you get JSON. And then if there is no error in the JSON code, then you can just return the result, which is then a Python object again, and I can keep working with that quite nicely. Otherwise, you get a runtime error, and then of course you have to look into it, what's going on. It could be an error in which happened because other changes were made that cannot be activated, or because somebody tried to set a tag that is not in the tag group, or maybe because the host already exists that you just try to create, or because the monitoring side is not accessible. So of course this will all give you an error message. So how does the Python data structure look like? This is a dictionary in Python where I have username, secret, so password, and also the action. And request data is a Python dictionary as well, which looks similar to the JSON one. I mean, you must be sure not to get confused, because one is a Python structure, the other one is a JSON structure. But it looks very similar, of course. So that's why I think the JSON converter in Python is quite efficient. Are there questions up to this point? I kept talking here for many minutes, but the next part would just be a demonstration of the script. Any questions? Yeah. We're waiting for the microphone here. Hello. If I import these hosts into the web API, can I then do it for the different sites and put it on one host? Yes, and they are being distributed then? Yes. Of course, in this case, I need to be in the distributed monitoring and have the configuration synchronization activated. So my distributed sites are on slaves for the master configuration, and then I can, for example, only talk to the master site via the web API, and there I set a site attribute, and that would be the site on which it is all monitored, and then it would be the same as using the browser and the web API interface and accessing the distributed site like this.
War das eine Meldung? Da kommt doch eine.
We have another question here. Hello, a very short question. Does this also apply to the action discovery? So would it be enough to get to the master in order to do a discovery on a host, like to trigger a discovery on a host which is remote on a slave? This would be really relevant in our case. This is something I need to forward to the Kettner team because I'm not sure. So could you repeat the question, please? Whether discovery can be triggered via the web API onto a remote monitoring. In theory, yes. Everything that's via maintenance, you mean discovery, that's always done via the remote API. Even when you're in Vato in a host and says discovery, then it will always run on the target site on which the host is being monitored. But I can trigger it on the central side. Well, even if you do not use the web API, discovery has to be running on the target system, otherwise it wouldn't work anyway. But it can be triggered on a central server, because on a remote side I can deactivate maintenance. Yeah, but it would still work. So it would ask the remote Vato to please do the discovery, and then you would get the results from the remote side. So it doesn't matter whether it's the web interface or the WAPI, it's the same. Well, it comes to the same function in the end. So it's the same function that's being activated in the end. One question about error handling. If there is an error message, is it formulated in a way we can understand what's going on, or is it cryptic? Well, I mean, can we guess what the problem could be? Yeah. We do get the information that, for example, other changes were made, that a tag is not available. I mean, that's all the information one really needs. There's another question on the back. I have a question about automation accounts in principle. So, can I only transfer username and password via the get parameter, or are there other ways? Well, unless I use HTTP, then that's the only way. So generally, CheckMK is built in a way that get and post can always be used, like both of them. So the variables do reach a target, and whether I use get or post, it doesn't really matter. I mean, they are in a list, and then they're being processed. Well, the easiest thing, though, whether if you have HTTPS, I mean, that's all right, you can use that. But you can also send any variable via a post. But, of course, there's the risk that it's ending up in the access log. Oh yeah, the post variable will not be logged in the access log. So that's one critical issue. Ralf has a question. To make it like perfectly automated and to have it run perfectly without problems, it would be nice to not have the risk of this activation of the changes failing because somebody has just been working with Vato itself. So it would be nice if you could use the web API and then lock the Vato for a minute. So the web API can then push the data in and could see whether there is any changes, any pending changes, and then it could be locked, and then you could push the changes in and then activate it and then unlock it again. Some kind of transaction, in other words. Are you thinking about that? Because then you could have like a maintenance window, like every morning 7 to 8 we have the automatic changes. The mechanism would make sure that it works, and then the administrators could use Vato normally again. Sounds very reasonable. People keep asking whether we have plans for anything. Yeah, plans for anything is a good, like rough planning. Well, we do a lot of rough planning, but basically what we do is what we do for our customers, because then we know that we do it correctly and we have somebody who actually sees whether it works the way they want it to. So if you have a customer who needs that, then of course we can do the rough planning together. I would say it's a bit complicated, but we could do specifications together, and then we make a price tag for it, and then we can insert it into the official version. And there would be long-term support for that as well. All right. I would like to start the demo. I have about 15 minutes left, if I can read the clock from here. And of course, if there are questions afterwards, I'm sure you can still present them. Okay, here we go.
Ich habe jetzt hier zwei ganz frische Sites.
Here I have two fresh sites, one main site
Und eine Remote Site.
and a remote site.
Wie zu sehen ist,
And as you can see,
noch in der anderen Host
neither of them has a host configured. Here in the remote site I have the Wato disabled right now, so I have remote monitoring with the configuration monitoring. And so on the remote side I don't have to access the Wato at all. Actually, I cannot access it at all. It wouldn't be nice. Then I need the automation user. So how do I create that one? What does it look like? Here we go. This is Benutzer Sync. And this is not a normal user with a password, but a automation secret for machine accounts. And the secret can be randomized, or I can enter one myself. Doesn't matter. What's set here is that this sync user has an administrative role. So this makes creating the script and the demo much easier to perform. Of course, I can have different automation users with several access levels. So I can have contact groups, for example, and thus give away access rights to certain folders. And then the user can use the Wato web API only in these folders. So all the access rights concept also go through the web API, and other hosts cannot be changed through this. So I didn't really want to go into it for the demo because it would be a bit complicated. So I think those who know the basics, they can imagine how it works. So I've started my two sites, and here I have the two XML files in which data for the host is entered. What the customer does not have is an automated export and an automatic execution of the script, because he cannot automate the CMDB at this point. So he has to pick those files up with a browser through a query. Basically, they're being compiled, and then he can extract the data, and then he throws them into a script, and then it imports it. So there are other CMDBs which could do that in a better fashion. Well, we didn't really have the final step here for total automation yet, but for a demonstration, I think it may be even helpful to see this interim step and see the data that's being imported, exported, and then later imported. Apparently I have a Linux server here. It's the www01 as an example. We have the same name here again. So there is a redundancy of entries. I have the primary support contact and also the owner or stakeholder, and the script is then turning all this information into one host entry. Then we have a second web server being defined here. Yeah, I think somebody asked for a little zoom in, which is also nice for the interpreter. So white on black should be fine. Maybe we can change color. And then I have a Windows server here, which is IMD01, where I am the owner. And there's an SQL server where somebody else is the owner. And then I am the primary support contact. So they have IP addresses. So there was a different export with this customer who kicked out some of the network devices. They had a network tag where all the switches were in there. and they had set a location for all these network devices, but the contacts were not defined. They simply weren't entered, and so they were not taken into account. So I want to show you the hosts are empty, and I am activating the sync script here. Sync Vato, and then enter the URL, so my site, and a user and a password. I mean, there are other ways to do this probably. This is a very simple way of doing it. And in the end, you have the list of XML files where all the data is in there. So if I access this, I can already see that certain actions were performed. I have a host name here, which has been created with attributes in the folder network with the host name, and so on. Then an SQL server. Here in the attributes, you can see, for example, that these contacts are being shown as text tags, And I'm not sure what the customer did with these tags, but probably notification rules, and he had those activated. And certain customers, for example, in this tag, location, and this just goes, the list just goes on. What you see here is that I can also set the site. The site is, I mean, looking at the CheckMK configuration, the site is basically a tag, right? I'm not sure whether the CheckMK developers want to disagree, but I mean, the site is in the tag list, and so I would say it does play a role in the attributes. And in the end, the sync script will try to activate the changes that have been made. So that's why it took a few seconds in the end, because the configuration had to be reloaded. And if I go into the CheckMK now and look at the hosts, then suddenly I have two folders. One is called Network, in which I have the 3 switches. I can see what side they're being monitored on. There's an IP address allocated with it. Or I have the server, which has 2 subfolders, Linux and Windows. And with those servers, it's the case that using the IP address, the sites were set. With the Windows servers, we see that it's still part of main site, and the IP address then belongs to remote site. And if I take a look at everything, in the status view, it has been activated. And for the demo, of course, all the service checks were disabled, because these are not real hosts. And I see 5 hosts, which are part of the main site, 2 on the remote side. And if I look at the properties of those hosts, then this is exactly what I imported from the XML. An alias IP address, the monitoring time, and certain tags, like the owner here. And of course it can happen that certain properties need to be changed. For example, I want to stop monitoring this host, which is an attribute that in a CMDB, I mean, this can be set via CMDB. And then if I run the script again with the new data that I just entered, then you can see
nur der eine Host
only this one host, www01, is being processed, the action is added, the criticalities tag is being set to offline. Well, this is basically what I was going for. In a CMDB, the host should no longer be monitored, so now it is officially offline. And looking into the details here, then here in the text it should be visible, but here you can see it even more clearly. Here, tag group criticality is now set to do not monitor this host, and in the end it's no longer in the list of hosts, because that is the setting. I mean, after all, it's still in the configuration, but it's no longer in the monitoring. And the customer runs that regularly and thus can activate all those changes from his CMDB, and the customer seems to be quite happy with this. This was what I wanted to demonstrate. Apart from that, I have, as a final slide, the link collection, the web API, and also multi-site automation is something that is very well documented, just like everything else on Matthias Kettner's pages. I can really recommend it. There are the links to this GitHub project, the OMD client. The I Do It has some information on their side about CMK integration, and then there's the conference presentation from last year, including the slides, and then the request module I can recommend very much if you want to start programming in this. If there are any more questions, I think we have 2 more minutes. Otherwise, I thank you very much for your attention and wish you a nice meal. Well, but there are questions. We've seen now the integration from CMDB to monitoring, right? So controlling the monitoring objects through CMDB. Is there any way, or are there any experiences doing it the other way around, apart from I Do It? So using data from the monitor and giving it to the CMDB? Well, I mentioned that the multi-site views can be the source for data. Of course, I can take host situation data, like get all host data through the web API, and then sync that with the CMDB. So this is one customer project where they needed the direction from CMDB to monitoring. But of course, you could imagine going the other way around. But you have to say exactly which system is controlling the data. Is it the CMDB or is it the monitoring? Well, normally both components are active, like you have CMDB objects that are being updated and kept up to date, and then the monitoring, which is working bidirectionally. And the CMD needs to, there need to be comments to update objects. And I mean, you need to have a definition for the case of conflict. I mean, you need a tool that can do a bit more than simply a sync script, which reads the data and then updates it into the CheckMK. I mean, I need to have some function to react to conflict, and that can usually only be done interactively. Then I need a GUI, and so on. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, I keep saying it's all software. In the end, you can do everything, but you have to keep in mind how difficult it becomes. Well, our data that comes from monitoring, and we've done some modeling, and we did it independently from external data sources. And now we have an API coming in, and we want to get the valuable data and the important data from monitoring. We want to put this into the CMDB. And we want to have a bidirectional coupling, but there is no set solution? Well, you could think about having like certain attributes that are being set by the monitoring, and this is being set by the CMDB. So maybe to reduce conflicts by doing this, yeah. Thank you. So these were like real hosts that you charted. What about clustered services, for example? We have not found a way to work with these yet. Well, clustered services, they are based on rules and defined by rules. And rules are excluded from this simply because I have to make them or create them manually, and clusters cannot be created through the Vato Web API. I don't think there is anything yet. I don't think there is a special attribute that I would need to set. But of course, that could be an extension, a new feature probably for the Web API. Yeah. Any more questions? I think we are right on time, actually. Enjoy your meal. Thank you.